Hey guys, welcome back to the Ripple Effect podcast. We are reaching and connecting with teens of today and sharing our experiences. I'm your host, Nathan.
I'm Jonathan.
And I'm Jeff.
And today we're going to be talking about Christians in politics. And the first question, does God take a side in politics?
Well, the short answer is no. He doesn't take sides. He doesn't say I'm like Republican, I'm Democrat. But he does ordain whoever is in charge of the country. In Romans 13:1, he says that.
Like John said, no, he does not take a side in politics. We definitely see that the times were much different back then, but he did tell us in the Bible that we must give to Caesar what is Caesar's and give to God what is God's.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I agree. He doesn't. He's far too above everything to take a side in human politics. And one of the verses I got is Acts 17:24. Which reads, "The God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man." Mm-hmm. So our social constructions, our sort of creations to fit people into different camps, those don't matter to God. He just cares about the people and where their heart is. And so that leads us into our next question. How should Christians vote?
I'll say this. Don't blindly vote for someone just because of their party. That's how you get a bunch of weird people into the presidency, and you don't want to do that. Don't find your identity more in your political party than you do in God. So you can't just say everything that aligns with whatever one person says just because they're in the party. You need to see what if they aligns with God, and pray to God and seek guidance on the matter. Ask him what he wants in a president, I guess. Something like that. Do research on the people running. And again, make sure their views align with God. And don't just vote for someone because they attach a title to their name that you agree with. And also remember, it's not a job to vote in a good person into presidency. And we were never told by God to do that. Don't get too wrapped up in everything trying to get the perfect person in, because they might not be good at leading the country, and God will ordain who is right for the job.
Yeah, and you definitely don't want to get lost in the sea of politics and make that all you care about.
Yeah.
Because God has to be first, and you have to put him first in order to actually vote well and be a good citizen and get the right people into office.
Was the question, should you vote?
How should Christians vote?
Well, they should definitely not vote, like John said, on political parties. Political parties have been shown to fail us all the time. They definitely do not deliver on the promises that they say they're going to deliver on both sides. It's not a one side does, one side doesn't. It's they all say things, but that's just how they get elected. I have had the privilege to vote once, and you can definitely see that they both try, but you have to do your research, and you have to make sure what they're saying is aligning as closely as you can to what God says. Now, I know both sides haven't had a candidate that has really shown that they're aligning their politics with God, but we have to look more at their policies. We have to look at if their policies are aligning with what God says, and try to vote based on that.
And there's a lot of pressure when it comes to politics, even from the Christian community. Because there are a lot of Christians who are extremely far right, saying you have to vote right, you have to save the nation, which is a lot of hyper-patriotism, and you have to not allow that to pressure you into voting a way that you don't feel God is calling you to vote.
Exactly.
And you really need to pray about voting. Because you're putting someone into authority over you. So you have to know that they will lead the nation well, they will lead you well, so that you're not made to do anything that God wouldn't want you to do.
And also, you have to make sure that their policies align with what they actually believe. Because a lot of people will just lie to get into office. We've seen that happen a lot of times. So you got to do your research.
Yeah.
And overall, in the end, whoever God puts in office, that's who is meant to be in there. You might not see it. It might not look at it. There could be chaos everywhere, but that's...
Yeah, Romans 13:1b says there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. So he puts all those authority there So it doesn't matter which way you vote, that person is there because God said he should be there or she should be there.
Yeah.
And another one that's a little bit sensitive in today's day and age, how should Christians talk about politics?
Well, there's nothing wrong with having like a friendly debate on politics. Like me and Jeffrey have debated politics a lot. Even if you disagree, you don't have to agree with everything to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
But once things start getting more personal, you like getting into fights and stuff. That's when you have to cut it off, because in the Bible it says don't cause division within God's body, or over something that God has already decided. In Titus 3:10 it tells us to not deal with anyone causing division. So if there is somebody like that that's always riling people up based on politics, then don't deal with them, because then you're going to get pulled into it. You're going to get riled up, and it's never going to end well.
You really have to know your limits when it comes to this sort
Yeah.
of thing.
Yeah.
If you know you can't get into a political discussion without getting into a fight, don't get into that political discussion, because that's just leading you down a path of sin.
Hmm.
And obviously that's not a good thing.
Yeah. Well, obviously, you can debate. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's when you start acting out of anger is when it becomes a problem. And one of the things we see a lot nowadays is people act out on their anger instead of keeping it civil and acting in love. One of the quotes that I've heard from my soccer coaches, there's a lot of people nowadays have forgotten that we can just disagree sometimes.
Yeah.
It's fine to just say, okay, you may be right, I may be right, but let's just disagree on the issue. And we will never see eye to eye, especially as Christians. Some people that have secular worldviews will never see eye to eye with us because of what we believe. But it's fine to sometimes disagree, and if people want to act out against you for just disagreeing and trying to keep it civil, then you must, keep going from there. You may have to ignore them for a little bit until you can get civil again, but it's okay to disagree.
And with political debates, especially when Christianity and morals are involved, you really have to keep it respectful, especially if you're with somebody who's not of the same faith. Because then if you don't keep it respectful, that's a bad ministry, and that looks bad on Christians and Christianity as a whole. But if you keep it respectful and you don't give in to anger, then that's a good ministry. You have now influenced somebody to perhaps think positively.
Yeah.
Of course, there are times when you could be the most respectful person in the world, and they'll still hate you for your views, and that's unavoidable. And you can't get too deep in your feelings about that.
Yeah. And one thing about it is if you set a bad precedence for Christians, then or for yourself, it'll also leak into Christians as a whole. So you may have some Christians that are civil and will debate civilly, but then you have some people that are really bad representations of the Christian name, and they'll go out there and they'll try to argue as much as they can, and every time they get in front of a camera, they'll say they're a Christian, but then you can see in their actions they're not representing Christian values or Christian morals.
Yeah, and that's where a lot of the negative view of Christians actually comes from, with the people who are so far on one side of the spectrum or other, where they just hate everybody and everything that doesn't fit with their views, and we don't want to be that kind of person who casts the bad light on Christ.
Exactly.
We want to act like Christ and act respectfully, act kindly whenever it comes to politics or just anything in life, so that we can have a good testimony with other people. Y'all got anything else to say on that subject?
You just got to remember that you're representing a whole bunch of people and God, so you got to keep it respectful. You got to love everyone. You can't fall into legalism and hate everyone just because they don't follow the same rules you do.
And legalism is a big thing with a lot of Christians today, where it doesn't matter. Jesus doesn't matter anymore. It's just, did you do it right? Did you do it wrong? Are you a bad person? Are you sinning? And they just completely forget about grace and the fact that God will forget your actions as long as you go back to Him.
Exactly.
And if I don't agree with a political leader, how should I go about living within the Christian guideline that God puts our authority over us, which is outlined in Romans 13:1?
This goes back to, Romans 13:1. They've been ordained by God, so you got to follow Him. But you also have to remember, we serve God first and men second. In Acts 5:29, it's telling you that. And you have to remember, if the leader in power is telling you to do something that overtly goes against the Bible, you can't obey that. You have to follow what the Bible says. Like in a bunch of countries that have banned Christianity, there's still people that are importing Bibles. They're having Bible studies, and that's amazing. That's an amazing thing that is happening in the world. But you just have to follow God, and as long as the leader isn't saying anything that is against God, then you got to follow them too.
When there's leaders that you don't disagree with, it's sometimes hard to not want to say something about it, but we must remember, as Christians, we must speak in love. So sometimes the best thing to do is not to speak at all. Now, we can't allow ourselves not to be vocal. We must speak out so that people know that we're still here. But we must put God first, like Daniel. When they banned praying in the country, he continued, or praying in the kingdom, he continued to pray. And even though that led to consequences, we see that God was with him the whole time. And no matter what we do nowadays, even if I don't see Christianity being banned in this country anytime soon, but if something like that were to happen, we must remember God's with us at all times. And even in the little decisions, even if it's not threatening our religion specifically, we must remember God is there. And even though things aren't going to go our way all the time, we must remember he's in control of the situation.
That's a really good example with Daniel, and I hadn't even thought about that. And now that you've mentioned it, there are a lot of other examples in the Old Testament of people being under authority that doesn't agree with God. Another one would be Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
Yep.
And the thing you really have to remember with these times when your authority isn't a Christian and doesn't obey God is sometimes God puts those people there to test you, to test your faith, to make sure that you are a faithful Christian. And you just have to, again, like Jonathan said, God is our first authority.
Yep.
You have to listen to him above all else and not put men above him, because men are flawed. Men are, in many ways, stupid.
Yeah.
And God isn't. So why would you follow men above him?
Yeah, it goes back to not taking a side in this, because then you will be putting politics over God. You'll be obeying the leader's policies before God's policies, and that'll just lead you down a very dangerous road.
And I know this is more of like social or society, but if you go back to even Lot, I know that he wasn't forced to be in the city at all. But when you have even society around you saying everything's acceptable, that's still man. And when you have people in power that are promoting things for society, maybe they're not making laws, but they're promoting society to do something a specific way. You must remember sometimes you got to turn away from that entirely, because God is first. And even if it's something little, where it's not a huge sin, it's not a big problem, it's still sin.
And another example people don't really think about would be Jesus. Because his authorities, the Jewish religious leaders, weren't following what God set out for them. And they tried to get Jesus to stop doing what he was doing. And Jesus didn't stop. He kept on doing what he was sent there to do. And then the disciples followed in his footsteps. They got stoned, they got beaten, they got put in prison, but they never stopped doing what God told them to do, which is a huge thing. You need to remember that. If your political authority disagrees with your views, always put God first, because he is God. So his laws, his institutions are more infallible than anything a human could do. Anything else y'all want to say?
Nope.
No.
Well, I guess that's all for today. Join us in 2 weeks when we talk about Christians and art. This was kind of a short one. See you 2 weeks from now.